We're going to move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker today is Dr. Renata Ivanick. She's an associate professor of population medicine and diagnostic sciences in the College of Veterinary Medicine here at Cornell. The overarching goal of her research is to advance One Health, the interconnected health of people, animals, plants, and their shared environment. Her computer lab develops new and sustainable data model-driven approaches for improving food safety, controlling infectious disease, and particularly relevant for today, optimizing food production systems. Renata, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Martin. I'm trying to orient myself here with different screens. So pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. So as Martin said, I'm going to talk about some modeling approaches in the space of food loss and food waste, and also modeling of effectiveness of reduction strategies. More specifically, I will start with just some big picture ideas or facts about modeling of food waste and loss, and then I will spend most of the time today talking about one of our studies on reducing microbial spoilage of milk, and then from that build on, again, bigger picture, what does it mean, who are winners, who are losers, and I'll finish with a few concluding remarks. So, but I wanted to start with just saying who we are, what we do, because some of the approaches and ideas that we have stem simply from our backgrounds and past research experience. I'm an epidemiologist and modeler with many years of experience in food safety modeling. And so those ideas that we have implemented in food safety modeling have then transitioned into this new space where we are working with food waste and loss. And so in thinking about food safety, but then also food waste more recently, what is really important realization for us, or maybe we can even think about it as a fact, as we move along the food production chain from farm to table and all the different upcycling opportunities, food is very important for health and well-being of people, obviously for nutrients and also indirectly through healthy environment. But what I really want to point out is that food is essential for livelihood of very many people that are working in this space. And so as we model food safety originally, and then now also food waste and loss, that's what we try to think both about food as the food itself, but also as a source of livelihood. So as I mentioned, food production from farm to consumer through manufacturing, logistics, service is embedded in a quite complex environment. It's quite multi-layered, in fact, and this system is not in a vacuum. It's affected by social norms and social organizations. It's affected by science and technological advancement, even things that, or including things that we heard today from other speakers. This system is very dependent on the local and global environment. Also, it's affected by markets and movements in markets, and also any existing policies. This, by the way, is a diagram that was published 2 years ago by National Academies of Sciences in Engineering and Medicine, and they about modeling of food waste and loss. There's something that resonated with me a lot that I wanted to highlight also here. They talked about the importance of systems approach to modeling, which also was mentioned multiple times during previous talks today. They said, taking a systems approach makes it easier to understand and minimize the unintended negative consequences of interventions or trade-offs, as well as to identify opportunities to maximize the benefits of changes. And this is really important because we are trying to do good here. We are trying to reduce food waste and loss, because obviously that's a bad thing to be occurring. It's bad on many, many levels. But as we are trying to minimize loss and waste of food, we have to understand and minimize any unintended negative consequences. And I hope this will become apparent to some of our thinking that I'll be presenting as part of this talk. I also want to just highlight how many different methodological areas there exist in this space. And this is just a figure that I found in a book chapter by Pam et al., published in 2016. They reviewed literature on models use to optimize agri-fresh food supply chain with the goal of minimizing food loss. And so as you can see, there are many different methodological approaches, deterministic and stochastic, but they also highlighted that although the purpose of those models was to minimize food loss, the main scope of the model was also to decrease cost or to increase profit, which then brings me back to what I initially said, that food is important because it's food, it's important for sustenance of our life, but it's also important as a source of livelihood. And therefore, whatever we do has to be, should decrease cost or increase profit to be attractive. And this brings me to our own study. This study was recently published in Frontiers for Sustainable Food Systems. It's on optimizing pasteurized fluid milk shelf life through microbial spoilage reduction. The first author of the study is Dr. Renata Ivanick, and she was the mastermind behind the modeling approach that I'm going to show you. Trained as a industrial engineer and with expertise in optimization. She was at the time postdoc in our lab. Currently, she's a faculty at Washington University in St. Louis. This study was generously funded by FFAR Foundation, and I'm very grateful for that support. So let's see what we did. In the study, we wanted to address one particular issue in the milk supply chain that was also mentioned earlier in Martin's talk, that is on psychotolerant spore-forming bacteria that occur in milk. Unfortunately, they survive many of the heat treatments used for milk processing, different pasteurizations. And because of that, later on in the shelf life, they cause premature spoilage. Most of the time, they originate from farm. As we think about this supply chain, starting from farms, so factors that affect occurrence of these spore-forming bacteria are farm and conditions on the farm, or what can farmers do to reduce them. Then moving along the supply chain and the processing, processors could implement different strategies, spore reduction technologies, to reduce counts of those spore-forming bacteria or spores, but those are costly. And then moving further along the chain, during packaging, distribution, retail, and consumer, if favorable conditions occur, spore-forming bacteria will germinate and growth may occur. And if it occurs to a high enough level, organoleptic characteristics of milk will change and the consumer will throw it away, resulting in one unhappy consumer. So for this system, now we wanted to address a question from a processor's point of view. Where should a dairy processor invest to reduce milk waste due to spoilage, or in other words, to extend shelf life? And so we approach this at two stages in the production chain, at the farm level and also at the processing. At the farm level, we assumed a novel premium payment system that would be based exclusively on the presence and count of those spore-forming bacteria, spores. So this would occur completely in parallel, independent of existing paychecks or any existing premium system for milk. And it will be based on weekly testing of milk to determine in which category in terms of spore count the milk belongs. And we've thought about 5 categories, with category 1 being the best. And also farmer can implement different strategies that are going a little bit out. So he or she would have to go out of their way, maybe better hygiene, clean towels for other and similar, or education so would have to invest time and money to make reduction happen. And so the premium system would help motivate a farmer. And then at the processing level, we were thinking that this processor could implement one or both of those 2 strategies, microfiltration and bacterifugation. Microfiltration can decrease the number of spores by 3 logs per half gallon of milk, to our understanding, and bacterifugation can can result in a slightly lower reduction, but can be implemented twice. And so with one run, it can reduce spore count by 1.3 log per half gallon package, or 2.3 logs if we are talking the double run. So with this two technologies, we want to know what should the processor do, where should they invest to reduce, to delay the spoilage, or in other words, to extend shelf life, where we define shelf life as number of days between milk packaging and the first day when 5% or more packages are defective, meaning that they will have a high count of this bacteria, which will change organoleptic characteristics. So this is our optimization problem from the processor's perspective. We used a mixed integer linear model, and we approached the problem in two slightly different ways. We developed two models. Model one, the goal is to maximize shelf life. What's the longest shelf life that the processor can achieve, but given an important constraint, the amount of budget, the available budget they could allocate for this purpose. And then in model two, slightly differently, our main constraint was guaranteed minimum shelf life. And so the question becomes, if I want to guarantee this minimum shelf life for all my products, what's the cheapest I can get to that goal? And in other words, minimize budget. So we studied literature and talked with experts and also the industry to then generate 24 instances, examples of processors with small, medium, and large. They each process different volumes of milk per year. We were looking into 5 or 10 years of planning horizon. And then each of those processors could be sourcing milk from different number of farms or producers, depending on their size or volume of milk they process. So it could be very small number, or it could be much larger. And then in model one, we allocated certain budget, depending on the size of the facility, to their goal of extending shelf life. Here in this blog, I'm showing a cost of interventions. So these are costs of the test to count number of spores in milk. That has to be done weekly, with larger number of tests being done for larger facility, then resulting in a reduced price per test. And then we have a series of fixed costs and variable costs for microfiltration, bacterifugation run once, and bacterification runs twice. So for this available budget that we allocated in problem optimization, for each facility, for each processor, we collected information about milk quality in terms of number of spores, and then we created different profiles for these processors. So these numbers are showing percentage of milk or fraction of milk in different categories. Category 1 being the best, category 5 being the worst. And so, for example, this processor number 1, small processor 1, he or she is processing milk that is intermediate category, with most of the milk in this category 3. For example, this processor has most of the milk in the best category, and actually all of the milk is in first 3 categories. In contrast, this other processor has most of their milk in the not good categories, in bad categories. So for these different profiles of producers in terms of volume of milk they process, their size, the budget, and also profiles of milk quality, then we run the model and find the optimal solution. So in this block, I'm showing what the optimal solution for each of these processors is. So if there is one under strategy, microfiltration, bacterification run once, bacterification runs twice, or premium system, then there is one if it's run, or there is no number if this strategy is not identified as part of the optimal set of strategies. If optimal solution includes a premium system, then in this part, we find out how much money should a processor pay in premium to producers for category 1 milk, whether it's little or whether it's a lot, per 100 pounds of milk. These are cents, or whether there should even be a penalty for worst category of milk. And so first thing that you can see is that each of these processors have a very different set of mitigation strategies that are optimal for their condition. What you also see is that in terms of increasing shelf life, we have quite a bit of range. So we have one processor for whom the increase in shelf life is 0. And if you look at the profile of that processor, it's a small processor that already sources milk of very good quality. And so the optimal solution for them is to do nothing, because their milk already has most optimal shelf life. Then there is an example, there are a few examples of quite extended shelf life of 13 and more days. Then here's another interesting example. In this processor could extend, by implementing this optimal strategy identified, could extend their shelf life by almost 13 days. And if you take a look about the profile of this processor, it's a processor that actually sources quite poor categories of milk. And then the optimal solution would involve microfiltration, bacterifugation run twice, and also the premium system with a high premium for a small fraction of individuals who already have good milk, in order to motivate other producers, other farmers to change their strategies and produce such milk to be able to get a premium. So overall, again, optimal solution is unique, and it depends for each processor, and it depends on characteristics of the processor in terms of production volume, quality of raw milk they source, the budgets they have, and also what's the penalty they agree to pay to their farmers. In this case, our highest penalty was 60 cents, but a different highest penalty could also be used in analysis. In model 2, then we used exactly the same profiles for those processors, but rather than constraining budget, the biggest constraint, or the most important constraint, was the targeted shelf life. In order to address the needs of consumers who want to be guaranteed that their milk will not be spoiled in this number of days. And in this case, this was 28 days. So the optimal solution, again, differed for each of the processors, and the optimal solutions are different than model 1. And these optimal solutions, for example, may include investing $0 more in order to reach the optimal solution for reaching 28 days a shelf life. And this was in a situation where a processor actually has quite poor milk, with almost all milk in the latter 3 categories, but because of the penalty implemented for this large fraction of milk, 63% of milk sourced is in this 5th category, and therefore penalty applied. This penalty can actually finance implementation of other mitigation strategies in the facility. And therefore, the optimal solution for this processor is to implement those strategies, but does not need to have an extra budget, or the required budget may be quite higher. So I would just like to point out that with those 2 models that I've showed, they could also be run in sequence, where processor can first identify maximum shelf life they could achieve for their characteristics in terms of volume of milk and also a quality of milk they source. But then for that maximum shelf life in the second round, use model 2 to identify lowest possible budget to achieve that. Now, there are obviously a number of limitations with models I showed. Namely, there are many data needs that are hampering our parameterization of models. So one of the things was that we used a novel premium system for farmers specifically in terms of those spore-forming bacteria with very little data. Another limitation was not really knowing well what is the combined effect of two spore reduction technologies that could be used in facilities. So we knew about their efficacy when they are done independently, but together there is a bigger need. There is also a big unknown what will be the monetary impacts if a facility implements these mitigation strategies, whether at the farm level or at the processing level. And so this brings me to the next set of slides where I just wanted to speculate about losers and winners when we reduce waste. When we identify, we apply modeling or not, maybe we use different strategies to come to identify a strategy that would reduce food waste or food loss. And so speculating with a toy example, in this case, if spoilage is delayed and less milk is saved, the consumer would save some money because they would have to buy fewer packages of milk. So this would result in one happy consumer. But the question is, how would this impact the rest of the supply chain? And also, here I'm combining both farm and environment and thinking about ecological footprint. Well, that maybe depends. If for this milk that now has extended shelf life or guaranteed shelf life, if the number of consumers increases because consumers really love that guarantee, or they really love that now they can keep milk in their refrigerators for a long time. So if the number of consumers is going to increase, everybody is going to be happy. Farmers could sell more milk, processors could then process and package and sell more milk, and retailers can sell more milk. So it seems that everybody in the supply chain will be happy. I'm just not sure what happens with the ecological footprint, because this might actually lead to even more milk produced, which again would be good for farmer, but then the question is whether it's good for the environment. Now, what if the number of consumers remains the same? So the number of consumers does not increase like in the previous example. So that one consumer who buys this product would still be happy because they would save money. But unless if the number of consumers doesn't increase, and now those consumers that are buying this product are buying less, then that would have some negative impacts downstream. So we will have, or upstream. So we will have farmers and processors, retailers unhappy, maybe some of them even quite unhappy in already a very strained environment. But then maybe for production of, because milk is not wasted, less need to be produced. So maybe this is good for the ecological footprint that their industry is making in the environment. So now, is this going to stay like this, or will there be some kind of a reaction to this new setup? So market is always reacting. Well, one possible way for system to reset could be that now farmers, they produce less milk, but they now have to sell it for more because they implement strategies that are costly at the farm level. So they cannot really sell for the same price their milk. Maybe they have to sell it for more money. Now that would also require increase in price per package at the processing and retail levels. And now this consumer would have to, use less milk because fewer milk would be wasted, but they will have to pay more for the package that they buy. And now we might have, depending on what the motivation for this consumer is, consumer might be very happy about it, because if their motivation is to reduce ecological footprint by their behavior, that would make them happy, although they would not save money. Or if their main motivation is to save money, they might actually be unhappy, and that might have another negative effect on the rest of the system. So with that, this kind of illustration about our thinking, and it's actually an active area of research, and I think we will hear more tomorrow in the second part of this symposium. I wanted to kind of conclude the big picture thinking, how we should think about modeling food waste and loss. And just concluding remarks. just going back to what I said originally, food is essential for health. It is obvious, and this happens via safe and abundant sources of nutrients and also through healthy environment. But food is also essential for livelihood of so many people in the world, people who use food production as their main source of income. And so as we model food waste and food loss, we have to balance many objectives, including efficiency in production, food security, environmental objectives. So this calls for systems-based approach, which we highlighted so many times today, in order to minimize any unintended consequences that I hopefully illustrated through this toy example, which might be so simple that it might be silly, but just wanted to get across how we are thinking about it. Also wanted to point out a big problem. So interactions across this complex environment are very complex and poorly understood. And so when we model food waste and loss at the systems level, we actually have to design interventions with very limited information. And sometimes even policies are designed without completely understanding what are the possible reactions to certain changes. And then finally, I want to conclude that sometimes food waste and food loss could be reduced indirectly, and just want to give a pitch for two ongoing studies that we have that are indirectly reduced waste. One is on modeling or identifying optimal level of food safety, whereby because food safety and food waste are so related, if you have to throw away food because of food safety concerns, that is also in some sense lost food, although it was lost for a good reason. But if food contamination would not happen, you would not have to do that. And then the second second study that we have ongoing, both of them being funded by USDA, is finding optimal control of COVID-19 in the food industry, because as we know, when the COVID-19 hit, a lot of food was wasted because of the disturbance of the whole system which was not able to adapt. Thank you. I hope I didn't go over time.
Thanks, Renata, and thanks for a great example of how to sort of optimize food reduction strategies. Any questions for Renata? Renata, quick question. You talked about data needs. What do you see as sort of the major needs for data to further improve these models and even help firms more, help managers more, I'm going to call them risk managers more, to make better decisions?
Yeah, so I'm thinking that mechanistically we can do all kinds of stuff on a limited scale. So if I implement this mitigation strategy, then this is what the reduction in spore count that I'm going to get. But thinking about externalities, this is really difficult to collect data on, because if this has never happened before, how would we know? This new intervention never was implemented. Nothing similar exists. So then it requires a totally different type of data collection, maybe expert opinion, trying to forecast using a crystal ball that nobody has, to try to think what might happen. And then when it happens, then it's too late.
Yeah, so trying to sort of get data, or even not necessarily data, but information on unintended consequences is clearly a challenge here. Any other questions?